afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Institute of Current World Affairs and Network 2020 webinar, where we'll be talking about El Salvador root causes of migration. We have Elizabeth Hawkins, who is an ICWA fellow, and Joel Millman will be moderating this conversation. I'm Courtney Doggart. I'm the president of Network 2020. Just as a brief introduction for those of you who might not know who we are, we're an inclusive international organization. We're based in New York City, and we're really trying to bridge the gap between the private sector and foreign policy worlds. And so we run a number of programs, including webinars like these, private member-only discussions, we do research, we run fellowship programs. So there's a lot. Please do check out our website for more information. And with that, it's a pleasure to turn this over to Greg Pfeiffer, who at the Institute of Current World Affairs, who has been a wonderful colleague in co-running some of these events. So Greg, over to you.
Thank you so much, Courtney. We are very happy to be partnering with Network 2020. Again, you guys put on such terrific events about the most pressing issues, including migration, which is one of the most long-standing challenges facing multiple administrations in this country, including the previous and the current administration. And like in other cycles, promises to address the outflow of people from Latin America to the United States appear to be receding once again. Among Central American countries, El Salvador has seen hundreds of thousands of people migrating to the United States since the 1980s. They have fled violence or were looking for opportunities that don't exist in their tiny, impoverished country of 6 million. Now it has a charismatic young president with a populist and authoritarian bent, and who has promised to bring new ideas. Still, many of his country people are considering risking the dangerous journey north to be their best option. We Americans are sometimes gripped by the human tragedy of which we are included in, and which we see on our television screens when they make headlines of heartbreaking images at the border. But I think that there's a deep lack of understanding about the whole picture, even our own very large role. Washington has fueled civil wars in Central America in the 1980s and prompted waves of refugees to the United States. Some were exposed to violent gang culture here, and when some of them returned, they exported that violence to their own countries. We are seeing the results in those headlines that we read and see today. Our speaker today, as Courtney said, Elizabeth Hawkins, spent 2 years in El Salvador as a fellow of the Institute of Current World Affairs. She was examining what is pushing people to leave their country. Her focus was on women who experienced gender-based violence. Before her fellowship, Elizabeth ran an immigration law practice in Seattle that she founded. Elizabeth will discuss what she saw and heard on the ground in El Salvador and still does. She's currently living in San Salvador, and from where she joins us. And she'll also talk about lessons for us and how the United States should be treating potential migrants to this country. After her fellowship report, there'll be a Q&A session, we hope moderated by another migration expert, Joel Millman, who is actually in an airport in transit, as he often is, with difficulty accessing Wi-Fi. As I said, we hope he'll join us a bit later to moderate. I'll just say a few words about Joel. He, as I said, is another former Institute of Current World Affairs fellow who studied the impact of arms aid on recipient nations in Central America in the 1980s. He went on to many years writing for the Wall Street Journal, much of it about the issues that he studied. He's author of the book, The Other Americans, How Immigrants Renew Our Country, Our Economy, and Our Values. And he continued that theme most recently at the International Organization for Migration, where Joel was press officer until this year. And he continues to work for the IOM. Like Joel and Elizabeth, the other fellows of the Institute of Current World Affairs spend 2 years researching, reflecting, and writing about globally important issues in countries and regions around the world. And they go on to become some of this country's leading experts on global cultures and international affairs. So I'm very much looking forward to hear what Elizabeth has to say at the end of her 2 years. And with that, I will hand off to Elizabeth for her report, after which I hope Joel will take over for discussion. Otherwise, Courtney will moderate and take questions from the audience. Elizabeth?
Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you all for being here. Thank you to Network 2020 for hosting us, and to ICWA for this incredible experience of being able to spend 2 years in El Salvador, excuse me, seeing the other side of what I heard about for my time during my time as a lawyer in Seattle. It's one thing to hear the stories of people who have fled or who have come to the United States, and another to spend time with those who have stayed behind, who have been deported, or who are considering making that journey but haven't yet made a decision. It also has been quite an interesting experience to be here during the pandemic, which I know has changed. And I'm so sorry, I have a little frog in my throat. Has changed the world so much, all over the world. And likewise here in El Salvador has been just devastating to the economy, and has opened a space where, as Greg mentioned, the president has been able to consolidate some power that perhaps he wouldn't have been able to under other conditions. So I'd like to start by looking at a map. I think Brian has that, because El Salvador really is a tiny country. Not everyone might know exactly where it is. I still have a few friends from home who think I'm in Ecuador. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, El Salvador is that orange country right there on the Pacific coast of the Northern Triangle of Central America, between Guatemala and Honduras. And so in order to reach the United States, migrants cross through Guatemala, Mexico, to reach the border. As Greg mentioned, there is only a population of about 6 million people here in El Salvador. And since the early 1980s, around 1 million, some estimates now, especially including the children of migrants, are over 2 million of Salvadoran citizens have relocated to the United States. And so it's a huge percentage of the population, and many Salvadorans have family and extended family who have made the journey to the United States and are sending remittances back, or who are telling them about their lives there, and creating this what anthropologists call an imaginary of migration as a possible life outcome. So for many Salvadorans, for most Salvadorans I know, migration is something that they consider as a possibility, that is in the back of their minds as something they may need to do, and that might be appealing or attractive for different reasons at different times, and I'll be talking about that, but it's sort of an ever-present possibility. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because when we talk about deterring migration or addressing migration, it's really difficult to, and it takes generations to change those imaginaries to, I don't think it's possible to turn back the clock on Salvadorans believing that migrating to the US is a possibility, is possibly the best option for them as they look at the different options for how to organize their lives. So the Civil War ended in 1992. And as Greg mentioned, the US played a large role. It was, during the 1980s, not long after Vietnam, there was a similar counterinsurgency happening here in El Salvador, where the US was backing the right-wing government against the guerrillas, the left-wing guerrillas, who were had been advocating for reform and redistribution of wealth. El Salvador recently celebrated its bicentennial of independence. It became independent from Spain September 15th, so just last week, 200 years ago. And after that, most of the wealth and the land became concentrated in the hands of a very small number of people who used it to farm coffee, cotton, sugarcane, and other export crops. And so the elite is sometimes referred to as the 14 families, which is an exaggeration, but not much of an exaggeration. So the wealthy elite really control most of the wealth and the government, and historically have been sort of backed by the military and all of the law enforcement apparatus to protect their wealth against the majority of Salvadorans who are poor. And so the Civil War came out of that struggle. And in 1992, there was a UN mediated peace accord. And that struggle between the left wing and the elite and the status quo moved into politics. And so from then on until very recently, there were two main political parties, and the country has just continued to be polarized. I arrived here on June 15th, 2019, and just 2 weeks before that, President Nayib Bukele came into power, and he is the first president to be from a third party. His party is called New Ideas. And there was a lot of hope around his election, that this would be the beginning of a new era. Since the Civil War, there has been increasing crime. Much of the instability in the country is blamed on the street gangs, MS-13 and the 18th. Looks like Joel might have joined us.
I am. I'm on the call.
Great. And so that the gangs have caused quite a lot of violence and also have been a political scapegoat. So one of the first things that President Bukele did was to launch what he called his Territorial Control Plan. And Brian, if you can help us with the second slide. So there was an immediate move to use the military and the police to crack down on gang members, who are mostly young men from poor communities. This is an example of one of the many billboards that went up around the country. It says, "Don't lose your life to the gangs. It's easy to enter, but the only exits are prison or death." And so you can see a very disturbing image of gang members or presumed gang members, prisoners with tattoos, lined up and being guarded by a heavily armed, it looks like a police officer. So this was the message that was sent right away, that the new president was taking control and was cracking down. One thing that I have learned and experienced living here is that the phenomenon of the gangs really is limited to poor communities. It's similar to large cities in the United States where, visiting Chicago, there are some neighborhoods that are incredibly violent and other parts, that you wouldn't even know that was happening. And it comes down at the end of the day to that income inequality and marginalization. So there were no policies to address the rampant domestic violence, gender-based violence, other types of crime and insecurity that people faced, but just this really strong message of repressing the gangs. And with that has come also recruitment of additional soldiers, more resources to the military. If you'll go to the second slide. El Salvador has only once had a war outside its or against another country. There was a very brief war with Honduras in the 60s, but it has an enormous army and they are involved in policing. So this is a street scene from a small town where you see a police officer and two soldiers armed for combat standing in the street, just patrolling. And this is common throughout the country. And the military and the police are involved in repressing the gangs, in law enforcement, but also often target anyone who comes from a neighborhood that's presumed to be a gang neighborhood. So, so they don't necessarily protect victims who are living in those places who might be victimized by the gangs, but people who are not involved in criminal activity are often caught between these two forms of violent repression, right? They're afraid of the gang members who threaten them, who extort them, and also of the military who might raid their homes or who might mistakenly arrest them or even kill them, because there is a high number of police or army involved shootings that are often reported as being in self-defense, but that's been shown to be unreliable. So for someone living in these conditions, when we talk about push factors for migration, scholars often talk about drivers and detonators or triggers. So drivers might be are the structural issues that make people vulnerable to displacement. So lack of economic opportunity, militarization, crime, discrimination or persecution. Those are the structural issues that are just happening all the time that make people think that migration might be preferable to staying where they are, or might make it necessary for them to leave. Whereas a detonator or trigger is the immediate visible thing that happens that makes someone decide, okay, now is the time. Now I'm going to leave. And what I've learned being here for 2 years is that those drivers are present to different degrees for almost everyone. People are navigating crime, they're navigating lack of opportunity, low wages, job instability. For women, different forms of gender-based violence are just a part of daily life. And so they, on any given day, might not be enough to make someone decide to leave, but they're already there. And then something happens. It could be a threat. It could be losing a job. It could be a landslide that destroys someone's home. It could just be an opportunity to leave. Maybe a family member has decided to try to go to the US and says, hey, come along with me. But whatever it is, that's just the most visible moment that triggers the decision. But it happens in this context of all of these different forms of marginalization and hopelessness that people are living with every day. Not long after I got here, there was a disturbing image. I decided not to show it here, of a man and his child who drowned in the Rio Grande trying to cross the border. And they were Salvadoran, and it was all over the news and everybody was talking about it. And it was an example of how over the last several decades, both Democrats and Republicans have cracked down on border security, have made it more dangerous and difficult to cross the border, have poured more resources into policing the border. But in my experience, that does very little to deter anyone from taking the risk of migrating. People know it's dangerous, they know that it's a risk, but so is staying here. And Salvadorans are already often navigating a high level of risk just in their day-to-day life. So one young man I know works as a gardener for a wealthier family near his neighborhood, and he has not been able to finish high school because at the public school that he goes to, there are gang members, and when he's tried to attend school, he's been harassed and threatened. He doesn't stray very far from his home, and the family he works for is moving to another neighborhood just about 10 minutes away. And he's not sure that he is willing to take the risk of continuing to work for them because his neighborhood is controlled by one gang. If he has to cross those lines, he could be in danger. And also his whole life, he's been in this claustrophobic situation of not having mobility. So even the idea of going, riding his motorcycle 10 minutes away is really scary to him. So when someone's navigating that level of fear on a daily basis, taking this one risk, a big risk, but this one risk of going to the US for the possible reward of living a safer and more stable life and being able to earn enough money to send home to support his family, that calculation is just looks really different than I think most of us, including me before I was here, would imagine that calculation would look like when you're thinking about risking your life. It really looks different when you're already risking your life every day. Another thing that plays into this decision making is how attached Salvadorans are to their families. Unlike in the US, where it's very common when someone graduates from high school to move out of the family home, to go make their own life separate from their family, in El Salvador, most families stick together, live together, visit frequently, and support many extended family members. So the next slide, please. On the left is a good friend of mine, and this is from her niece's birthday. We went to visit her family out in a small town about 2 hours east of San Salvador. So there she is with her mom, and her sister and nieces are inside the house. This is a very typical house in rural El Salvador with the concrete blocks and a roof. This is actually much improved from when my friend was growing up. From her wages in the city, she has paid to have a floor. They have a cement floor, so it's no longer a dirt floor. She's paid for the roof. There's still an outhouse in the back. There's no running water. But this is a family who lives pretty comfortably for their socioeconomic circumstances. And my friend, who's my age, in her late 30s, sends money back, has supported her nieces and nephews, supports her mom, and she is thinking of migrating. For all the time that I've known her, it's something that she's waiting to have the opportunity to do. And if she does that, that means that she might never see her mom again. When someone leaves the country and doesn't have immigration status in the country they go to, they can't freely travel back and forth. So in order to make more money to send home, in order to live more safely, it's a huge sacrifice that people make by not being able to stay part of these close family relationships. But it's also often framed as a sacrifice they're making for their family, that if I go, I can make more money, I can then support my family. And it's also not surprising that when people have family members in the US, that family reunification is often one of the main reasons that they too want to migrate, because they want to be close to their family members. For women, this is has an extra layer of nuance because El Salvador is a deeply machista society. There's It's very patriarchal. So women often find themselves in abusive relationships, victimized, harassed at work, paid less than men, and with fewer options about their life choices. Actually, this friend whose example I'm using is the only woman that I know who lives independently in San Salvador. I don't know any other Salvadoran women who live and support themselves apart from either being married or living with family. Because it's just not economically possible, and there are all these structural issues that lead into that. So the promise of migration can also be a promise of liberation for women who have ambitions and who want more freedom than they have access to here in El Salvador. I think I'm getting close to my time. The last thing I want to mention is climate change. That's fine. Yeah, we can go to the last slide. Climate change has hit Central America hard. And another thing that's really striking here compared to being in the US is that no one I've met doubts the reality of climate change. People talk about it all the time. They talk about the weather. Oh, you live up on the hill. It used to be so cool up there before climate change. Or, oh, the crops, this is happening with the crops this year. It used to be different before climate change. It's just something that people talk about all the time. Each year during the rainy season, when hurricanes hit, there are mudslides, there are floods, there are frequent earthquakes. And because of the sort of unrestricted development, a lot of the new construction is particularly vulnerable to these environmental catastrophes. And so that's another thing that causes people to flee when they lose. Sometimes whole neighborhoods are destroyed. So what can the US do in all this? As I've said, much of the migration policy has come down to trying to make it more dangerous to cross the border, to deter people from trying to come, to say, we won't welcome you here, stay home. But that doesn't work because it doesn't address the reasons that people are fleeing. And it also, I think, doesn't take into account how deeply, oh, my screen just went dark. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see you actually. So,
oh, good. I don't know why my screen went dark, but people see the US as even those who have critiques about the US's immigration policy or the way that the US behaved during the Civil War. People believe that that there's the rule of law there, that they'll be treated fairly, despite stories to the contrary. People, again, have family there. They've been hearing all of these stories. They see it as a land of opportunity. And they don't have the same hope about their own country. As I said, when Bukele came into power, there was quite a lot of hope about him providing this third way. Most of his policies may have been popular, but haven't really addressed the root causes of migration. And now, and I can say a little bit more about this during the Q&A, as he has consolidated power, taken some anti-democratic actions like taking control of the courts, and now instituted Bitcoin as a national currency, which has been incredibly controversial. People are again losing hope in that. So people see the US as their destination. And I think that if we want to address the root causes of migration, we have to accept that there is this relationship between these two countries, that Salvadorans are, in effect, our neighbors and our family members. And we can't just say, stop coming here. It's not going to work, and it's wrong, in my opinion. But at the same time, there are also domestic policies that the US can pursue. The US has to be a leader on climate change. You know, El Salvador's deforestation policies might make landslides and other climate catastrophes worse, but they're not the, you know, here is not where most of the carbon in the environment is coming from. Likewise, as I wrote about in one of my pieces, El Salvador has the most restrictive abortion law in the world. And that is another cause of a lot of hardship for women here, and even the persecution of women who have miscarriages. And I'm very troubled by the recent law that Texas passed. And Salvadorans are looking to the US to be a leader on these things. And so I think that's my biggest takeaway, is that we really have to lead by example and acknowledge that we are in relationship with El Salvador, and think about what we want that relationship to look like going forward. So I'll stop there and see what questions you have.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was fantastic. Joel, do we have you online, or would you be able to moderate a few questions with Elizabeth before we open it up to Q&A?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay. A couple things. First of all, congratulations, Elizabeth, for your fellowship. I understand also for your family, with a young Salvadoran has joined our ICWA community.
Thank you, Joel.
And also for this excellent presentation this morning. Nothing you said didn't generate for me whole paragraphs of questions and thoughts I might share. I was a fellow in the region. I also concluded this year 7 years working for the International Organization for Migration. I just wanted to take one point that you said about deterrence on the border. It's not unique to the United States. Obviously, lots of countries are engaged in lots of deterrence everywhere, pretty much everywhere. But I'd like to know if you can talk at all about how counterproductive it is. And we know you and I are both worked in the Pacific Northwest, and we both know that migration in an undocumented community in states like Washington and Oregon and Idaho and elsewhere really soared in this century, almost as a reaction to tougher border security. And what we always talked about at IOM when I worked there in Geneva was, if you make legal and regular migration difficult or impossible, you'll make not just irregular inevitable, but you'll swell the number of people living undocumented as second class or even lower class citizens in your society. And we saw this across those states where agricultural workers who never used to stay in the Northwest, for decades, would come on, do the seasonal harvest, had no choice but to stay, and their population numbers swelled. And my daughter's school went from maybe 2 bilingual kids in kindergarten to 50% of her high school class. And this was completely normal across those states. And it was almost entirely because people couldn't afford to go back and forth. Now, Salvador is probably more likely than any country on earth to have a binary relationship with the lead destination country, much as Palestinians do in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. But it's very close to the country most Salvadorans go to, and yet it's the country that makes it harder for people to go back and forth. And we think that the things we associate with undocumented irregular immigration would be reduced if more people could go back and forth. So my question is anyone taking a serious look at that in Salvador and trying to be counterintuitive and make the contrary argument? No, more migration is your answer, not less, or not more restrictive migration policies. Is that something you can address before we open to other questions?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to talk about that. And I think you're right on with that question. In terms of what people are talking about here, there are conversations about increasing guest worker visas and and continuing to have temporary protected status, which is a status that many Salvadorans have in the United States. But there isn't that I think what you're talking about and what I would also advocate for is just a revisioning of the relationship between these two countries, and to say, as you did, you know, Salvadorans want to come and work in the US. Not all of them, you know, it's not a, I think there's a lot of that slippery slope argument. And as I said, many Salvadorans would prefer to stay here with their families. They love their country. You know, they decide to leave because they think that that's the best option. But I think that Salvadorans also have a lot of pride in being good workers and being good, family-oriented people. And I think there isn't enough conversation about the contributions that Salvadoran migrants make, and the fact that, yeah, migration is inevitable, and we need to look at this differently. And in terms of the border policies, you're right on about the fact that many people who go don't intend to stay forever. They would like to be able to go for a season, make some money, come home, go back and forth. And because of how militarized the border is and how criminalized immigration has become, that if you get caught coming back for a second time, there are all these penalties that people do decide to stay, and then they end up staying for decades. The partner of a good friend of mine was deported last year, right before the pandemic, and he had gone, like many do, you know, just hoping to make some more money, not necessarily planning to stay a long time. And there was just an ongoing conversation about when will he come back. That decision ended up being made for him. I have another friend who was renting a house and was told, the owner keeps saying he's going to come back from the US, that this is the year he's coming back, and then chose not to. So I think there are a lot of people who would like to be able to come and go, who would like to be able to come back and try it out and see, you know, that I think that people are afraid to come back because they know they won't be able to walk that decision back if things don't work out here. So to be able to come home, see how it works, and then have the possibility of returning to the US if they need to, would I think open up a lot more mobility back and forth. Likewise, in terms of family reunification, you know, if I'm a single parent and I go to the US to make money to send to my kids, at some point my kids are going to want to come join me, you know, and children are very vulnerable, particularly vulnerable in the journey through Mexico and across the border. So I think you're right. The other point I want to make about how counterproductive the measures at the border are is that many of the coyotes, the professional human smugglers that take people back and forth, they offer these package deals because it often takes multiple attempts to cross the border because it's very difficult now. And so people pay a flat fee of several $1,000s and try to go to the US. And then if it doesn't work, they get a certain number of other attempts included. And so I have a couple of friends who have paid that money, tried to go once, been sent back. They don't really want to go again. They're like, I don't want to, and now I know how dangerous it is. Whatever desire I had to go has left me. But now they're in all this debt because the wages in El Salvador are so low. The minimum wage is just over $300 a month. And if you have a $5,000 or $7,000 debt, and people feel like they have to then go back to the US in order to earn the money to work that off. And so, you know, it is creating this class of potential migrants who feel like they're trapped by that. So something else to keep in mind.
That's a really great example that you're giving. You know, we make the case in the IOM that more and more the coyotes are treating this as a casino, that their house is really rigged in their favor, all the odds. They agree to 3 or 4 attempts, but people are mortgaging their homes and their farms and not actually paying the full fee up front. And there's no question that this is leading to terrible abuse like murder. When you already paid the smuggler and they've got their money, they have almost no incentive to make you cross, to get you across, especially because it's so difficult to get across. So one thing I wanted to say on a positive note is there is a lot more effort going on to accessible to people. I had a great conversation this summer with a corporation in Canada called Maple Leaf Foods that brings in Central American Salvadorans and Hondurans to work in pig processing, pork processing plants in Manitoba. They said that it was costing them up to $10,000 per worker to do all the processing, to have lawyers available and to do all the paperwork and fly them and all those things, which was utterly unsustainable if they couldn't get paths to residency and paths to citizenship for those people once they got their work permits. They just couldn't afford to spend that kind of money and only get them for eight or 9 months and then have to go through the process again. Happily, Canada allows its provinces to tailor their own immigration policies. So the company worked on the province of Manitoba, and the government did put pork processing on a list of essential industries at which a migrant who comes for work could aspire to become a resident or even a naturalized citizen. So sure enough, if you go to the Google Maple Leaf Foods in Brantford, Manitoba, the first thing that comes up on Google is not only a map of the town showing you where the plant is, but it also shows you where the pupuseria 100 yards from the plant is. And they point out that over 150 of those original workers that IOM helped send up have already become Canadian citizens. So they have all the rights to go back and forth, and it can be done. I mean, there are creative things, and corporations know they work. So I'm not completely pessimistic. I think the communications job that we all have now is to show that there is an alternative. It's better than putting 5 or 6 of your family members out at $5,000 a piece to try to get a job. If you can raise that kind of money, send one person and put them on a track to a legal regular status, you'll accomplish. But of course, the coyotes don't want you to do that. They want you in their casino, throwing your last savings onto the table on the hope, you're going to hit the lottery. So I sort of am more than a half full glass kind of person, even though the recent history hasn't been very kind. I think we should turn to some of the questions. Now, there's one, I don't know if you can answer this. E.B. Strom writes, what are the numbers of migrants coming to the U.S. through legal ports of entry versus illegally across the border? And maybe you can talk about the shift of using asylum as kind of a plan B. As soon as, if you do try to cross irregularly, people now know they can petition asylum or try to sort of try both things at once. Or are there still lots of people willing to try regular ports of entry channels?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think that people do take advantage of the legal options that they have. People do participate in the guest worker programs. People do apply for their family members. If a family member does become a resident or a citizen, they do apply for their family members to come and join them. As I said, hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans have what's called temporary protected status. That's for people who were already in the United States when there were two devastating earthquakes here in 2001, and it was no longer safe to come back. And Salvadorans, I think, are the largest number of TPS holders and have consistently renewed their legal status and renewed their work permits, again, without the possibility of a path to citizenship, just because of the way that the law is. But I think Salvadorans are motivated to have those benefits and to do things legally if they can. I mean, nobody wants to put themselves in danger or live as a second-class citizen if they have another option. But unfortunately, there just aren't legal options for people beyond those family-based processes, which, again, you have to have a family member and an immediate family member. Here, there are extended families. People are close to their aunts, uncles, cousins, but only parents, siblings, spouses, and children can apply for family members. And they have to be a citizen or a resident. So that limits the number of people who can benefit from those programs. It's also very expensive. And the guest worker programs, as Joel said, they have to be sponsored by an employer. So what many people do is they go to the border and turn themselves in and request asylum. Now, Salvadorans actually have one of the highest rates of being granted asylum because many people are fleeing with legitimate claims who truly would be persecuted if they stayed or were returned here. But it's a very small percentage of the people who apply. There are a lot of reasons for that have to do with the way that the law is interpreted to discriminate against people from Latin America and to not open the floodgates, but also because people who, might not really be, might have some fear around the general insecurity, but who aren't, don't fit the profile of someone who's truly fleeing for their lives, apply for asylum because that's really the only option they have available. And the asylum system is very backlogged, and I think if the US were to create another legal way for people to migrate, I can't say what the numbers would be for sure, but I think Salvadorans would absolutely take advantage of that opportunity rather than go through the asylum process if they could avoid it.
I'm glad you mentioned TPS. You're right. Salvador is the #1 country. I think it's 180,000. It might be 280,000. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it's a great departure point to talk about legalization and immigration reform in general, because studies have been done that show TPS holders of all the countries, of Liberia, Honduras, Haiti, Sudan, I believe was another, have the highest, let's say, participation rate of home ownership, of children born in the United States, of starting businesses, which is completely logical. If you have all those things, or any of those things, you're more likely to want TPS than another migrant who isn't sure about their permanence in the United States. So we've been, the work I'm doing now in Philadelphia, we've been advocating for TPS to be part of a point system where you could establish your worthiness as a path to citizenship, much as EB-5 does for wealthy foreigners who want to invest money, in real estate or a business in a distressed area of the United States. They get a green card, which is, it's mostly known as Russians and Chinese and some other Asians investing $500,000. We think there are thousands of Salvadorans who have already invested $500,000 in their businesses, a store, or a chain of restaurants, or landscaping company, cleaning companies, anything that would demonstrate that they didn't do it in one day the way a rich foreigner did. They might have done it over several decades. And they're on TPS, so they're known to the government. They've already registered. They followed all the rules. Maybe they should be at the front of the line for immigration. And I want to just, in keeping with the theme of the port processing and things that actually work, this past year, even under the Trump administration, a large group of TPS recipients in the city where I am right now, Liberians, did get a special change in the law where they had until December 2020 to change their status and get on a path to citizenship. And thousands here in Philadelphia were eligible. The other pockets at Providence, Rhode Island was another, and Minnesota is another, where Liberians have settled. So there are ways that, even though it was a band-aid and a stopgap method to keep persecuted people or vulnerable people in a semi-legal status, it can be a jumping off point for something much more complete. So I don't think we should despair that all they have is TPS, or who knows what's going to happen to them. From those temporary arrangements, sometimes good solutions can emerge. Let me go to another question for you. Ilan Gilbert is asking, there have been many programs to support development in El Salvador and other countries in the region over the past several decades. Which of these have shown positive results in terms of improving livelihoods, changing perceptions about prospects of staying in El Salvador as opposed to migrating? I'm more doubtful on those kinds of things, but if you want to convince me otherwise, please jump in.
I can't speak to all of the programs. I think there are people doing really good work funded by USAID that make a difference in the lives of individual Salvadorans. But I mean, those programs just don't address I guess the reasons that most people are fleeing, it's also someone made this point to me recently that I was really intrigued by, a professional who works here in with the immigration service. And he said, you know, so many of these programs are focused on entrepreneurs. A large amount of the Salvadoran economy is informal. People have their own businesses, really, you know, tiny little businesses selling things in the market, et cetera. And supporting those projects can have a high impact. So this isn't to say that that doesn't have a place, it's particularly for women. I think it can be really good. But he said, you know, what about people, professionals who want to earn more money in El Salvador? You know, the wages are just so low, and there are these resources going into kind of increasing this informal economy or increasing self-employment on this very small scale, where you still have people who have a university degree, you know, a professional job making $500–600 a month. And El Salvador is on the dollar, you know, that's the currency here, and now Bitcoin as well, which is a whole other topic. And many things are in US prices, you know, so for the aspiring middle class, you know, those projects don't make a difference. And for children trying to figure out how to have some upward mobility, you know, there's just not a clear path there. So I don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, I don't have a lot more to say other than I think they probably do some individual good, but if anything, it's again contributing to this image that the US is the more powerful country with more resources and a better place to be.
Yeah, that lends more to the understanding of a cyclical migration. People might, like farmers everywhere in the world, they might need a second job between harvests or between planting seasons. This is how societies have existed for thousands of years. And you know, I think there's a lot of sense to be said. Let people wash dishes between, you know, in the winter months, and that make the $5,000 or $6,000 they might need to stay another whole year. Actually, I saw this summer in Costa Rica, where indigenous communities from Panama come in to harvest coffee, and they say, look, if we didn't have this, if we didn't have a 4-month window to harvest coffee all over Costa Rica, all of our people would have to go to Panama City and get jobs cleaning homes, meaning our women. I mean, the men won't do it. The men will stay home on the reservation and use drugs and become alcoholic. The women will be gone to their families. They'll be gone 10 months or 12 months, 11 months a year. We lose everything, you know, if we don't have access to this harvest. Because it's a neighboring country, Costa Rica was very enthusiastic about helping, and Iowa was part of that help. But I don't see why that can't be a Salvador, Honduran, and Guatemalan relationship with an employer in Philadelphia or New York or Los Angeles acting exactly the same way. I mean,
I even wonder about oh, sorry to interrupt you, Joel.
No, go ahead.
I wonder about the US companies that are operating here in El Salvador. You know, one thing that I think many people are struck by when they arrive is that there are so many US companies that have franchises here. When you drive down the main roads, there's a Starbucks on either side of the main road that I drive down to get into town. You know, I'm from Seattle. It's like, I never left. You know, there's Wendy's, there's Burger King, there's, you know, all of these Denny's franchises, and the prices are pretty much the same if I go in and order something from Starbucks, but people are making minimum wage. So I don't know where those profits are going, but I just wonder, you know, if there was some way to pay US type wages at those companies, then why would somebody go to Seattle to work at a Starbucks if they could work at the Starbucks in San Salvador and make a living? That's an open question that I have.
It's a good question. I want to get to some of these other questions, but I don't know. I can't see all of them. We've covered a lot of them in the discussion. You know, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is the role of physical security. People underestimate, but you didn't in your talk just now. You said that the risks that I'm already taking is something that people consider pretty strongly. You know, Costa Rica again has thousands of Mexicans, Colombians, of course, Venezuelans now. A lot of times their motivation is it's just not safe in some of these countries to be successful. I mean, to have a business, have children who go to private school, often attracts kidnapping, extortion, threats of all kinds. People underestimate the physical security as a motivator for migration. You certainly don't. But do you see any hope that they can strike a balance to become more of a secure country without becoming a repressive country?
Well, I think they could. I don't know that it will. I hope that it will. I think the ongoing repression and anti-gang rhetoric is really counterproductive. As far as I know, kidnapping is not an issue here the way it is in Mexico, for example, or Colombia. But extortion is common for business owners, and I think just the ongoing navigation of the security situation is a trauma, you know, that people have, that you're constantly thinking about where you're going. Is it safe? And I think there has to be a change in the way that public security is talked about. That, you know, for me, I'm not living in a gang-controlled neighborhood. My family has a car, you know, so I'm not using public transportation in areas I don't know. And, you know, I feel pretty safe most of the time. But I also know that if something happened, calling the police might not do anything. So there's, I think most people end up feeling protected by their wealth. I don't live in a gated community, but most people who can afford to do live with, you know, private security. And I think there's just been a loss of faith that the state can provide any kind of safety. And then the state policies really go toward repressing poor communities that are perceived to be more criminal, and where, you know, there are these gang issues. So I don't know what it would look like to, or what would need to happen for there to be a shift toward really protecting victims, away from impunity, away from repression. But I think, again, like, because I know that I can live here in relative safety, I know that that should be possible for other people as well. And, you know, that it's a complicated question that involves mobility, economic resources, and the state response to violence that I'm not sure there's the political will to really address.
All right. I'm not sure if we still have Joel. I see he's muted, but Joel, are you there? I think we're just at time anyway. So I'm going to say, Elizabeth, thank you so much. You gave us such a wonderful overview. Oh, there you are, Joel, of the situation in El Salvador. Joel, thank you so much. You added so much to the discussion as well, and to our partners at ICWA. Thank you, Joel. I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
No, I just, you know, I think we should be hopeful. I think that human drama is amazing. I had a talk this weekend with a current ICWA fellow in Turkey who's studying Syrian migration, and I begged him, to think of the other places in the world that are dealing with these great big movements of people, like Venezuelans in neighboring Colombia. And I pointed out to him that we had a tweet a couple of days ago from IOM's East Africa rep. It's a friend of mine. He said that IOM moved 47,000 Ethiopians back from one country, Saudi Arabia, only since July of this year. Gives you a sense of just how enormous the numbers of people who are trying to find a new life are all over the world in places we never think about. We don't think a lot about all those thousands of Ethiopians in Saudi Arabia. So we should, all of us, think of this as a big global trend and look at solutions that different countries are doing. And I think this discussion today, we brought a lot of that out. So that was very helpful. Over.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for your great work, ICWA. Thank you for your wonderful work, Elizabeth. Best of luck to you, Joel. Thank you so much for adding to the discussion. And Greg, as always, it's a pleasure to partner. Our Network 2020's next event is on Tuesday, September 28th. It starts a little earlier at 11:30 a.m. and it's with Dr. Steve Sung, and it's on China's rise to global power. So please do RSVP. We hope you join us. And please check out our other events, and hopefully we'll be doing something with ICWA before long, because the insights from the fellows are just remarkable. So thank you all so much.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye now.